Until we get to 1968, a little movie that takes place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, about a group of people that has to survive together. And we're talking about one Night of the Living Dead. And the reason why Night of the Living Dead is very impactful and important in itself is, you could almost say, is the original Get Out in a way, where you have this, your lead character is portrayed by a black man. And I remember doing the episode Night of the Living Dead way back when I reviewed some of George A. Romero's, well, his original trilogy of his Dawn trilogy. I mean, not his Dawn, but his Dead trilogy. I'm sorry. When I talked about his Dead trilogy, and I did Night, Dawn, and Day. But I remember talking about Night and bringing this up about how Dwayne Jones, he's the hero, and that was the very first time that you've ever really seen that on the scale that it was on, and how it was socially, there was a huge social commentary about the movie, in the movie, mainly because here you have this character of Ben that is a black man that takes charge and is actually trying to lead this group of white people. And yes, you have the one character that's very racist or whatnot towards him, and everyone else isn't so much. But one thing that gets brought up when they're talking about this in the documentary, and I hadn't even thought about it, is the character of Barbara. Like, you don't really know, is it that she's so freaked out about what's the event that's going on, or is it the fact that there's a black man in the house and he's taking control? What is she more afraid of? Is that the reason why she went catatonic and everything? Because she had never really been around any black people, and here the person that's saving her life is this black man, but she doesn't know how to react to that. So she just kind of shuts down and everything. And then how Duane, he has such command presence in the movie, and how a few scenes that I really enjoy with him in the movie too is where when he's like, when they're talking about the cellar is the safest place, and he's the first one to say that cellar is a death trap, which by the end of the movie it kind of is. He, whatnot. Of course, that's where he had to go at the end in order to survive the night. But what happens the next morning? He gets killed by the mob party, the search party or whatnot, that's roaming and kind of taking out the zombies and everything. He ends up getting killed. Now, was he killed because they thought he was a zombie, or because he was a black man? We still never know the answer to that question. But when they're talking about that and how he's saying that, he tells the guy, like, hey, you can be boss down there, but I'm boss up here, and if you up here, you gonna take orders from me. And that is something that resonates, because at a time, even though I was not born in the 60s, of course, or anything like that, so I didn't live through that, but that was a tumultuous time. And they talk about it too, how the reason why it was such a revelation of seeing Dwayne Jones in this lead role is because what was going on in the country at the time with the whole Jim Crow era and everything, and how seeing Dwayne Jones on screen, commanding the screen, and he's beating the hell out of these white people and he's taking charge, that it kind of gave black people a sense of pride and everything, especially the fact that it is. I think everyone knows the story of when George Romero and his crew, they finished filming and everything, and they're driving up to New York, and they have on the radio where Dr. Martin Luther King had been assassinated, and everything. And it gets brought up in the documentary too about whether or not did George and his crew, did they know exactly what they had, on film, and did they know, they had to have known that it was gonna change, the course of history, film history too, when this movie premiered. And that is why Night of the Living Dead is probably considered one of the greatest horror films of all time, because of the fact that here you have this black man that is the lead in this movie, that kind of, just his presence in the movie helps bring a social commentary, a dialogue that probably wouldn't have been brought up if a white actor was in that role. So for him to be in that movie at that time, right place, right time, it just couldn't have worked out any better than that. Um, so after Night, um, we start to see like, okay, black people can be important in the horror genre and everything. And then we get to the 70s, and that's when the whole Blaxploitation era of filmmaking comes along. And I mean, for the most part, we as black people get. I mean, there are some movies that are very good from that's a part of that Blaxploitation era. But overall, a lot of those movies are not really good. And everything. And also in the 70s too, a lot of even though a lot of black actors was getting a lot of work, but a lot of the roles that were given to black actors was always either the pimp or the hoe role. There wasn't a lot of trying to think of certain movies that came out in the 70s that we could compare it to. I mean, you wasn't getting any black Godfather stories. You wasn't getting any Rolling Thunders or movies like that where black people were just we wasn't seeing like black life, true black life. It was always we was the hustlers, we was the street people, and those were the stories that were being told. Granted, I mean they were getting work and stories were being told. I mean you had your Superflies, your Shafts, of course. Even though Shaft it shouldn't be considered a blaxploitation movie. It's a movie about a private detective that just so happens to be black, and then of course the whole black themes get portrayed into it. But that could have been any type of movie. So the fact that it's considered a blaxploitation movie, kind of goes both ways, I guess. But then you have these movies like Abby and JD's Revenge and these type of things. But once again, it still is always overly sexual, and then of course the whole women in cages stuff. But one of the movies that they really touch on too is Blackula. One of Pam Grier's earlier roles is Scream, Blackula Scream, and show how Pam Grier wasn't. And they mentioned like how Pam Grier was actually allowed to be an actress in this, and she wasn't just looked at as the sex symbol of the movie and everything. And then they talk about another movie that stars Duane Jones that came out in 1973 called Ganja and Hess.
The only perversions that can be comfortably condemned are the perversions of others. I will persist and survive without God's or society's sanction.
Like the cover art from it and everything, and I know it's in the book that I have, 1,000 Films to See Before You Die. I know it's in that book, and I had never had any real interest of seeing it for whatever reason. I don't know why, but and it's kind of funny seeing Duane Jones in color because I've only ever seen him in Night of the Living Dead. He didn't do a lot of movies in his career, even though he's like a horror icon or whatnot. But he didn't do a lot of movies and everything. He actually became more of like a teacher and a professor and everything, more so. But Ganja and Hess was his second movie that he did after Night of the Living Dead. And basically it's about a black man who becomes a vampire, and then he meets this woman and he turns her into a vampire, and how they deal with that whole thing. And just from them talking about Ganja and Hess on the documentary, it made me want to see it. And ironically enough, it was actually put on Shudder, and I watched Ganja and Hess, and it's a very interesting movie, and it kind of lives up to what they were talking about on the documentary. The fact that it's a slow movie. It's not a traditional traditional vampire film. and everything, which that is all true about it. And I will say that Duane Jones in this role it gets overlooked, and I think it deserves more credit, and more looks for what it is. But the crazy thing about it too is that the movie apparently didn't have a lot of prints for it. It actually ran out of print and everything, so you never actually saw the real film for a very long time, and it didn't do good in the States when it first came out because it wasn't what the Blaxploitation Era was about or anything, because here you had this very well spoken Dr. Hess Green and everything, and these people who didn't act like what we were seeing in the Blaxploitation film. There's like one pimp and one hoe that shows up in the movie, but it's only for like maybe about 2 minutes or whatnot. They're not like the vocal points of the movie or anything. So I guess that's one reason why it didn't do so great. And also, it got redubbed as being called Blood Couple, which was like, what kind of title is that or whatnot. But yeah, I definitely recommend anyone who, if you haven't seen Ganja Hess, I might watch it again and do an episode for the podcast as well at some point. But it really, like I say, this is one of those documentaries that really kind of open your eyes, and just to see people who talk about the whole history, because it is a history lesson. And me, because I do enjoy history so much, I learned a lot about stuff that I maybe only knew a little bit about. And even the stuff that I thought I knew a lot about, I learned even more about it. So that's one of the reasons why this is a true, really good documentary to watch.